Rodd Duff, your host.
And I'm producer Barbie.
And together,
we bring you our podcast,
Insights and Straight Talk. And with that, producer Barbie and I are out. Hey everybody, how you doing? Before I get started, a couple quick announcements. I want to thank our newest sponsor, Leaf Lab. You know a lot about them from the show. We work with them in the Regeneration School project. They came aboard, and I want to give them a big shout out for all the wonderful stuff that they're doing and being of assistance to help us move our message along, as well as the Mangum City Library. Again, working with Leaf Lab. And them supplying this. I'm not working with Leaf Lab, working with the Regeneration School project, and Voices at the Table. So today I have checked off and wanted to give those two sponsors a real big shout out. So with all that said, my friends, go grab your coffee, grab your tea, maybe even the kombucha. Because today's conversation is about something most leadership conversations skip. We talk a lot about systems. We talk about tools, right? We talk about frameworks, dashboards, certifications, and process maps. But what we rarely talk about is the person inside of the system. And that's where things quietly break. Because you can install Lean. You can certify Six Sigma. You can adopt AI, automation, or the latest operation manual, or model, I should say. But if the person doesn't change, in other words, if habits don't change, if character doesn't change, if discipline doesn't change, nothing really improves. It just looks better on paper, right? That's why today's conversation matters, because our guest understands something that's been lost in modern leadership culture. Transformation is not a project. It's a practice. And it doesn't start at work. It starts at home. You know what? In your body, in your calendar, of course, in your faith, in how you show up when no one is watching. Today on Insights and Straight Talk with your host, Rodd Duff, and the ever-present producer, Barbie, we're joined by Randall Dupre, a transformative leader, author of Everyday Lean, John Maxwell certified speaker, and founder of ForgePoint LLC. Now, let me be clear. Randall is not someone who learned leadership from a stage. He learned it in factories. In fact, aerospace. In manufacturing environments where excuses cost money, delays cost trust, and poor leadership costs people their livelihoods. For over 2 decades, Randall has led Lean and Six Sigma transformations at companies like Boeing, Unified Technologies, GKN, Goodrich Aerospace, and one of my personal favorites, Trane. He's been inside systems that had to work. And what he discovered along the way is simple, but it's uncomfortable. Most transformation efforts don't fail because the tools are wrong. They fail because the people leading them are disconnected from who they are. That's the heart of his work and the heart of today's conversation, because Lean, as Randall teaches it, isn't just a business methodology. Oof, that was a tough one. Never mind. You know what I mean. It's a way of living. It's about eliminating waste, but not just from the shop floor, but in your habits, in your health, and in your relationships, right? Your leadership at home. So it's about asking better questions. Where am I undisciplined? Where am I avoiding responsibility? Where am I saying the right things, but living differently? And that leads us into a part of this conversation that a lot of shows won't touch. but we will. You guys know that. Manhood, faith, and leadership without performance. We are living in a moment where boys are growing up without clear rites of passage. Men are exhausted, not guided. Fathers are present, but unsure what they're supposed to model. And workplaces are feeling it. Families are feeling it. Communities are feeling it. Randall doesn't talk about faith as a brand. He talks about it as a foundation. Not loud, not performative, not wrapped in slogans, but lived. Faith as discipline, faith as responsibility, faith as service. And he speaks honestly about what happens when those anchors are missing, when leadership becomes positional instead of personal, and when environment becomes cosmetic instead of transformational. This episode is not about perfection. It's about alignment, about becoming the kind of man, leader, and mentor whose life actually supports the values that they claim. If you're a business owner who feels burned out by the constant change initiatives, if you're a middle-class professional carrying responsibility at work and at home, if you're a father wondering how to raise boys into men in a culture that will not help you, won't. If you believe leadership should make people stronger, not smaller, this conversation's for you. Because rebuilding the great middle class doesn't start with policy alone. It starts with people who are grounded, disciplined, accountable, and willing to lead from the inside out. That's what Insights and Straight Talk is about. No hype. Nope. No shortcuts. No borrowed authority, just lived experience, honest dialogue, and families that help us rebuild family by family, workplace by workplace. I didn't mean families to say families 3 times there. By our discussions, family by family, workplace by workplace, community by community. So settle in, because today's conversation isn't about becoming a better manager. It's about becoming a better man and letting leadership follow that. Randall, let's get into it.
Yeah, thanks, Rod. And it's great to be here with you today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm very much looking forward to this discussion. And you know, we talk a lot about, we have just over 100 people on right now. They're still kind of climbing in, 120. But we talk a lot about leadership, and I always talk about on this show how I'm kind of working the system, because I do 6 shows a week, right? We do at least an hour, 6 days a week, sometimes 2 or 3 shows. Don't do that very often anymore, though. That's tough, man. But I get this free advice, so I get to hear all this leadership information from people that I would normally never have access to, right? And so it's great to hear this approach, and these are always very, very exciting, because this show got started by working from the inside out for my own personal journey. Right. So, what is your journey? We talked about it a little bit back in the green room. What journey put you on the journey you're on now that brought us together here in today's show?
Yeah. So the journey that started the journey. So my journey goes back, a little bit over 20 years. Right out of high school, I got into manufacturing. I graduated at a time when, you didn't necessarily have to have a college degree to move up at a company. At least that's what I thought when I graduated. I did eventually go back to school and get education, but I started on the shop floor. I worked in a lot of different factories and a lot of different positions. And, my very
just
first...
a side note, Randall, just a side note, if you don't mind, because I come from there, as I mentioned. What industries did you work in? I noticed the aerospace. You didn't start in aerospace.
I didn't start in aerospace. Yeah, that's kind of that's kind of where I found myself after a while. But actually started at Trane. That was the first
Ah,
manufacturing company that I worked for was Trane. Yeah,
wow.
and
Impressive company, by the way. Very
yeah,
impressive company.
yeah, great company. I worked there for a few years. They eventually were bought out by American Standard, I think right before I left, and I'm not sure where they are today. But at the time, I was brand new to manufacturing. I was one of those guys that would drive by the factory and think, I wonder if there's anything I could do in there. I don't feel qualified to work in a factory like that. And little did I know, they had a very robust training program. They brought me in, they taught me everything I needed to know, made me a contractor on a 90-day probationary period, and kind of bounced me around the factory, just put me wherever they needed me. So I got a chance to
Nice.
learn a lot of
Nice.
different, positions and do a lot of different stuff very early on.
Yeah,
Um,
that's so valuable. I mean, that had to have been I mean, that had to have been, well, here's an interesting thing. So I talk about the journey before the journey. That was kind of pivotal to your journey, getting
right.
on to your journey, right? I mean, if that entree didn't go quite as well, it might have been a different story, right?
Rod, it's funny you mentioned that because when I first started, I hated it. And I literally told myself I had to do 3 weeks of training. And the way it worked was after each month of employment, you got paid out for one of those weeks of training. So you had to work there for 3 months to get paid out for the full 3 weeks of training. I literally
Wow.
told myself when I started that I was going to stay there long enough to get paid for my training and I was out of there. I did not like it at first. I was not accustomed to, being in such a dark and grimy environment. I spent a lot of time in the machine shops where there was a strong
Oh my
coolant
God.
smell that would get on my
Oh yeah.
clothes, and it was very just not ideal. And so early on, I wasn't sure I was going to last. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have if it wouldn't have been for their machine tech and training program, which I applied to right at the 90-day mark and got accepted into. It was a program where
Wow.
essentially they train you in-house to be a machinist. And so I
Wow.
I got selected for that program right on my 90th day. And it was a 6-month program where essentially they train you. Yeah, thank you. Essentially, they give you 6 months to, it was a combination of hands-on experience in the shop as well as a classroom setting, and really taught me everything I needed to be a machinist and a machine operator.
Wow, man. That's what a, I mean, well, actually, and at that time, we were just starting to thin out on that because a lot of people skipped a generation. They went into all computers and the machinists, the plumbers, the hard work folks, the backbone builders. Um, Really, there's a whole group there from like my age down to under your age, probably into the 40s ish, where there's a big gap, a real thin area, and you were at the right place at the right time. My God, huh?
Yeah, I was at the right place at the right time. And
Yeah.
matter of fact, the program actually didn't last much longer after I went through it, just for various different
Interesting.
reasons. I think they outsourced it. They wanted folks to come in with the certification and machining, kind of on day one. So they outsourced it quite a bit to the local community college. But I was privileged to go through the program, and that's really what kept me
Nice.
in the manufacturing world. Was I got that opportunity to be a machinist, and I loved machining. And I did machining in one shape or form for about 13 years. Started off as an
Wow.
operator, and then became a supervisor and a first line manager in a machine shop, and that's really where I started leading my first transformations.
And that's where, I mean, you talk about lean and Six Sigma, and those operational needs. Uh, that's interesting because that's the heart of it all right there. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, absolutely.
that's the heartbeat of it.
Yeah, 100%. So I worked at Trane for a few years, and then I was, drawn to aerospace. So I ended up leaving
Nice.
Trane and going to Goodrich, and I went from one machine shop to
Mm,
another. So I actually was only at Trane a few years. I spent the majority of my time in aerospace with Goodrich Aerospace, and then eventually Goodrich was bought out by United Technologies, and I became part of United Technologies. But I always tell folks, I remember to this day the very first A3 that I ever did, and this was before I even
What's
knew
an
it.
A3?
Yeah,
What's an
so
A3?
so technically A3 is just the paper size, but it's what a lot of folks in the lean world call their continuous improvement project is their A3.
Okay. I gotcha. I gotcha.
Yeah, so at the time I was new to Goodrich, and I was again on another 90-day probationary period at a new company. And the shop that I worked in had this board that they called an A3 board, and it was just a big whiteboard. And essentially, I didn't never really got a good overview of it. No one really explained it to me. I kind of just learned by being part of the meetings and the discussions that essentially all the items on that A3 board were improvement projects. They were all ideas that the other operators in the shop had come up with and essentially got approval to then go and implement. So there was this A3 board, and I remember I was probably, I don't know, halfway through my 90-day probationary period, and I had an idea for an improvement. And I went to my supervisor, Billy. I don't even know if Billy would remember this conversation, but I remember it to this day. And this has been, over 20 years. But I went to Billy and I asked Billy, I said, "Hey, Billy, is that A3 board, is that just for full-time employees? Or can anyone put an idea on that board?" And I will never forget Billy's response to me. Billy's response was, "Randall, that board is not just for full-time employees. That is how you become a full-time employee."
Ooh.
Yeah, and so
Ooh.
so in other
Love
words
that.
yeah, so in other words, not only was he empowering me to, come up with ideas and then lead them, but also he was basically setting expectations that, look, continuous improvement is part of the job. Like, this is not an additional, activity or initiative. This is just something we do as part of our job.
Yeah. It's part of your job title, right? Part of your whole department, part of your whole life.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I put my idea on the board, Rod, and it's a little complicated, but I'll try to simplify it as much as possible. The
Please.
machining cell that I worked in, we had to do a lot of setups. So we had sort of, I think at the time there was 3 CNC machines in the department. We had this whole carousel system and like 20-ish pallets that we had to set up for different part types throughout the night. And there was a platform you had to walk up and down about 3 steps, and you had to do this multiple times per setup, and then you had to do dozens of setups a night. So I couldn't even tell you how many times throughout the night I would walk up and down this platform. And myself being a bigger guy, I'm a little bit on the heavy side. Like, if I could avoid walking up and down stairs, I'm gonna do it, right? So, and when I say walking up down and up and down the stairs, you'd have to walk down to get the work instructions, bring them up. That would show you how to do the setup. You'd have to walk down to get the hardware, bring it up, get the tools, everything you needed, the parts, the raw materials. So it was multiple trips up and down these stairs. So I didn't know the term at the time, but essentially I had an idea for a setup reduction event. And the event actually involved creating a setup table where we were actually doing the setup, so point of use, where we could essentially store everything that we needed to eliminate all the walking up and down the stairs. And so I
To
didn't know.
one central location.
One central location. Yep. So essentially, what it allowed us to do is, instead of walking up and down the stairs for each and every component, we only had to walk up one time. So we would get everything on this table ahead of time. Then once we got to the top of the platform, we had everything we needed. We didn't have to step down again from the platform until the setup was done. And this was before I even knew what the 8 wastes were. I didn't even know. If you would have, mentioned waste to me back then, Rod, I would have thought you were talking about trash in the trash can. I had no idea
Right.
what waste were. I never heard the term SMED or setup production. This was very early on in my career. And then looking back, I see what I was doing, and it was before I even had the words to describe it. But essentially, it was a setup production event that I was doing, and the idea, it was funny because at first, there was a lot of naysayers, like there usually is. who didn't think that it was a good idea because they just couldn't see how we could set up a table that would be, ergonomic from, standing on the flat ground and also when you're standing on the platform. So they didn't really couldn't picture in their mind how you could get everything that you needed in the right location.
Interesting.
Um, and there was some pushback about that. But once we started to get it implemented and tested out, it was very funny how things evolved because all the people who were very, I would say, negative at first, they started adding to it. They started embracing it and they actually liked the idea and added more to it than I originally thought. So my original thought was, we were going to add 3 or 4 things to the point of use location where we needed them. And they started identifying other things that we would probably need, like gauges to do inspections and things like that. And I hadn't even thought about that, but it just kept building, it kept snowballing, and we kept adding more and more to this thing until eventually, we had this great setup table with everything that we needed. We eliminated, I couldn't even tell you now how many trips up and down, how many steps, and how much time. But it was a big improvement. It was back before I even started measuring those sort of things. But it was a big improvement and an improvement that everybody in the department benefited from. And that was really where I would say my passion for lean really begun. And it was,
Yeah.
mainly because I had a leader who empowered me.
And when that got off, when that went off, when that program got you got to a point where you could stand back and kind of do this thing and go, wow, that felt good, didn't it? That
Yeah.
felt really good, didn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it felt
That
really
was
good. Yeah, it felt really
Go ahead,
good.
go ahead.
And I would say that, it just made everybody's life so much easier, because by eliminating the waste involved, the motion of walking up and down the stairs, by saving the time, that we were spending hunting and gathering things and
Yeah,
bringing them
right.
to a point of use location, we just made everybody's life easier. And there was this huge safety element that really no one was even thinking about that was also added. And it's so funny how those things work because a lot of times when you do eliminate waste, you do make your job a lot safer. And it's not always the goal, but it should be. But a lot of
Yeah,
times
absolutely.
it's a very positive side effect.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that's because there was less motion, less chances for slip, for trip, for on and on, and while you're carrying these items, especially.
Yeah,
I want to I
absolutely.
want to I want to hit a couple of these questions because there's a lot coming in. We got 600 people on right now. Congratulations, by the way, quite a draw. That's very nice.
Awesome.
Um, the let's see what, and then we can kind of get back onto the story, and because I think you're kind of right at where you are. And by the way, before we get off, before the show ends today, on the in the private chat, can you put your contact information, however you like best to be contacted, whether that's your book website or your other website or your company, or your email, whatever that is. Can you put that in there? Because you know how it is. A month from now, a week from now, whatever, somebody's going to say, "Oh man, I wish I was on with Randall on that day because I would have asked him this." Well, now they can contact you directly, and just makes things more lean, more efficient.
Absolutely.
All right,
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
thought you'd
we'll do
like
it.
that one. Let's hit Clive here. How can leaders apply everyday lean without overwhelming their teams? I,
Yeah.
I, I really like that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that, from my perspective, lean really starts with the leaders and empowering their people to just take initiative and run with the ideas that they have to make their work better. In my time working in manufacturing spaces, the thing that I've observed the most is, usually the people with the best ideas are the people doing the work. And that's not to take anything away from the engineers who support the processes or the management team or any of the other functions, but the people doing the work usually have thought it through and they have ideas. So from a leadership perspective, I would say 2 things. I would say, empower people to at least, come up with ideas and get the buy-in and implement those ideas as much as possible and keep it very simple. Don't go about trying to roll out a ton of different things. I will say for me, for the first few years of my, machining career, my idea, my understanding of lean was very simple. It was 5S. That's all I knew about lean was 5S. I learned those 5S's. That was a big part of my job because
Give
obviously in
those
the
to us. Give those to
yeah,
us.
so I'll give them to you the way I was taught them. It might be a little different than what most people are familiar with, but it's sort, straighten, shine, standardize, and sustain. I think some people use set in order. I think that's probably more
Right.
common, but those are the S's the way I learned them. And you know how it goes when you learn it one way, it's kind of hard to ever
It is.
go back. But same thing. But essentially, I learned those 5S's early on, and they were so applicable in the machine shop because obviously, in a machine shop, you're trying to get parts out, you're trying to do it as quickly and efficiently as possible. You can't have a lot of clutter. You can't have anything that you're going to trip over. And it was really, something that was in my mind really focused on safety and creating a safer environment, but also enabled me to focus on quality because I had what I needed to do, create quality parts and do quality work. And also enabled me to, increase throughput and improve flow because I didn't have to worry about safety. I didn't have to worry about quality. Those things were so built in that then my conscious efforts could go towards improving my flow, getting my productivity through. And so that very
So
simple concept is something that, what I've seen in my own experience, Rod, is a lot of companies they skip over it. It's almost like it seems too basic or too simple and they want the flashier, they got this shiny object syndrome and they want to go for the flashy term or the flashy project and they skip over the simple
right.
basic stuff like 5S.
So just to build on for Clive, when you're empowering this out, and of course not overfilling the plate because that's now defeating that purpose. What does it look like? How do you obviously your leadership over time is what accomplishes it, but how does your team get that empowered feeling? How do you what does that look like?
Yeah, good question. So I'll tell you, in my experience, what that's looked like is you let the folks doing the work come up with the ideas for improvement. You have the good discussions with the team. You get the buy-in from everyone before you start moving forward, or at least from most folks, because you're always going to have a certain percentage of folks who are, going to be the late adopters or very resistant to change, right? So you kind of get that,
100%.
get that buy-in from as many folks as possible. And then as a leader, it's super important that the leader, is very positive about it and gives it the right amount of time to, actually take root and be tested out. And I'm not going to give a specific time frame because it really kind of depends on the business and what the improvement is. But the leader has to really give it some time to, let everyone get familiar with it, let everyone get good at whatever the change was, and it really become the standard. And the leader has to hold folks accountable to follow the new standard. So, if you do make some sort of improvement to a process, like in my case with the setup table, give it some time for folks to try it out before you make any changes or decide that it's not the right improvement. And hold people accountable for following that standard. And what you'll find in most cases is that once everyone has had a chance to try it out and you've given it a little bit of time, there might be some tweaks, but it's usually going to be an improvement that's going to stick around.
Well, and you're getting input as you're setting it. So in other words, there's this suggestion, then there's this improvement made, established, and then there's this time for working with it.
Mm,
But as you were implementing it, also, I assume the people that are involved are also you're getting their input as well, not just from the initial idea and then how's it working, but along the way as well. That's buying in as well too, right?
100%. Yeah. I mean, when you're implementing any sort of change, you got to have the people doing the work involved in the process, the ones who are willing to be involved, right? Because not everyone is
Right.
always interested in being a part of it. Some people do have the mindset of just go and do it and then, show me what I need to know when it's done. But most people want to be part of the solution. Most people want to be part of the process. They want to have their input considered, even if you don't go with their input. They want to make sure that their input is heard and that it's considered. So yeah, involving them along the way is super critical. And then having the flexibility to evolve the idea as you go. So, like in the case of the setup table in the machine shop, I got input from everyone involved. We implemented the initial idea, but then there was just this snowball effect where other folks just kept
Right.
adding on to it and adding on to it. And I could have very, easily had the mentality of, hey, this is my idea. I want to do it my way. But the leadership that I had at the time, kind of coached me against that. The leadership I had at the time was very much, very positive towards, continuous improvement and wanted us to consider those ideas and build. And I'm super glad that that was the approach that we took, because we ended up with a better product in the outcome.
So I like this question that David's got here. It's kind of expanding what we're talking about right now. What we're talking about is primarily industry or work related. But in your work, in your life's work now, you're really building. You're teaching people to build themselves from the inside out and
Right.
through faith. And so let's expand off a little bit here on some of this. And we got 700 people in here, by the way. What's the first habit you recommended for someone new to lean living? Because this is a well, in the monologue, in the opening monologue, we talked about this where what if you've got a system in place, but the person is disconnected, right, from what is making them a more lean person, right, a better person, and how would you answer this question for David?
Yeah. So what's the first habit I would recommend for someone who is new to lean living? The very first thing that comes to my mind is you have to learn to see the waste. That is the very first thing, the very first step. So in order to see the waste and learn to see the waste, you have to understand what the waste are. So
Right.
so I'll quickly go through them just to make sure everyone's on the same page. But I know there's different methods that people have used to learn the waste. I was taught the 8 waste, and I use the acronym downtime to remember them all. So that acronym stands for
Okay.
defects, overproduction, waiting, non-utilized talent, transportation, inventory, motion, and excess processing. So what I would say is the very first thing is to understand what those waste mean and what they look like, and start to observe them in your everyday life and pay attention to them. It doesn't matter whether I've worked with a manufacturing team or a business process team, an accounting team, HR team. Everyone has a process. Brushing your teeth in the morning, there's a process. Baking a cake, there's a process. No matter what you do for a living, there are processes involved, and those processes contain those 8 waste. Maybe not all of them, but they contain them. Every process will contain some combination of those waste. So looking for those 8 wastes in your processes, whether it's at home or at the workplace, I would say is step 1 for me. And that's what I call learning to see. Learning to see is just becoming aware of the waste that's happening in your life. Because so many times I've seen and I've heard, and I've been a victim myself of this mindset of, I don't have the time to do what I'm passionate about. I don't have the time to do what I feel called to do. And I know a lot of people feel that way, but a lot of our time gets absorbed with waste. So learning to see the waste to me is the first step. Learning to see the waste, because only when you learn to see it can you actually start to address it.
Say that acronym again.
Downtime?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yes.
Well, what it is.
What it is? Yeah. So defects, overproduction, waiting, non-utilized talent, transportation, inventory, motion, and excess processing. And we could sit here and brainstorm examples, because I will tell you that this is not exclusively like manufacturing waste or any industry. This is ubiquitous. Those wastes show up in various different forms in everything.
Yeah, that's why I asked you to re-say that, because in preparing for today's show over the last number of days or whatever, I'm very interested in that transition of workplace and I got a reflection coming off the hardwood floors right into my face there. But I was wondering how that transition, what that looked like.
Yeah.
And so as you were going through that, I'm thinking about them at home or on the production floor, and it translates. It's it's a, this is a lot easier than I thought it was going to be, as far as, trying to make sense, being, a coach, right? Trying to make sense and talking to a shop floor guy, or somebody in sales, to take it home. Be that at home that you are at the office, right? And
Right.
that's kind of what we're dipping our toe into here.
Yeah.
And that's why I asked you to say it again, because I was listening to it, and it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, yeah. And, it's one of those things that I think a lot of us will just kind of intuitively start to try to eliminate waste from our life without always having the labels, without having the terminology to put on it. And that's kind of where I was at as a new operator working in a factory. I was finding myself doing things that I might have done at home. Cleaning my room as a kid taught me some things about 5S that I then applied in different departments that I worked at. And I think a lot of us, we do these things and we don't always have the terminology. We don't have the full understanding to really make the most use of it. And that's kind of where, in my book, Everyday Lean, I wanted to kind of help people to see that, hey, these are principles that I've been using for 20 plus years in manufacturing environments and helping, different functional teams to improve what they're doing. But it's also something that could just help us in our everyday life. And here's some examples, and one simple thing, I'll give you a couple simple examples that I know everyone
Please.
that's listening probably does. There's probably not a single person, who would start to bake anything without turning on the oven first to preheat it. Right. And this comes to mind because I had this conversation with my, 11-year-old daughter not too long ago, whenever she was asking me if she could bake a cake. And I was like, yeah, go ahead. I was like, we got all the ingredients, how to follow instructions, go ahead. And so I walk in the room, 15, 20 minutes later, and she's, ready to put the cake in the oven, but never turned on the oven to preheat it.
Oh,
And so we had this conversation. And I told her, I said, that should be the first step, because if that's not the first step, there's going to be some waiting there as we wait for the oven to preheat. And that's just kind of something that most of us just intuitively do. Or if we're looking at the instructions on a pizza box, it might be the first step on the pizza box is, preheat the oven to 400 degrees, right? But that's just an example of, how we will go about using lean tools to eliminate waste without even really understanding what the waste was that we're eliminating.
that is so funny. I love that. And perfect timing on that little education piece, learning piece, learning point. Um, Ariel here, and this is a perfectly timed question, I believe. How do you keep lean principles alive beyond the workplace? Because at the workplace, you're implementing a program, so it's going to be implemented. It's a little different at home, right? There's a little more democracy, and a little bit more dynamics going on there than at the office. So, in filling out what I asked you earlier, how would you answer Ariella here?
Yeah. So one thing I would say is, and this I would apply whether you're leading, at home or you're leading in a workplace. I would say you have to be able to lead yourself first. And this is actually, one of the John Maxwell principles. I forget exactly which book he says that in, but that is one of the leadership principles that he teaches that I love, which is, you have to lead yourself first. And so if you're trying to implement lean or eliminate waste at home or outside of the workplace in general, start with yourself. Start with yourself. Do it yourself. Lead by example. Eliminate the waste
Good
that you
point.
can from your life before you try to go about, imposing it on your wife or your children or anyone else in your life. Right? Show them how it's helping you, because success breeds success. And when you could show folks that, hey, yeah, I've eliminated these wastes that I found in my life, and it's given me back X amount of time, or I've seen, an improvement in my own personal productivity, or, less stress, or whatever it is, however you want to measure the impact, then you'll have a lot more credibility when you start to talk about implementing it, outside of just your own personal space, to the rest of your household or your family or whatever else, you want to implement it. So start with yourself, lead yourself first, get some wins, and then communicate those wins to the people around you and show them how it's helping you. That'll usually help to create a lot more buy-in anyway, and a lot more interest, and then a lot more buy-in and acceptance when you actually start to replicate it, using some of the lean terms, right? You're going to kind of use yourself as a lighthouse or a model area, and then replicate it across the rest of your household.
So good time to talk a little bit about your book. And by the way, don't forget about the contact information there in the private chat. Not that we're wrapping up by any stretch of the word. We're only a couple questions in, but in your book, are you giving examples of what, when you're at home and you're using yourself as an example, right? Are there step-by-steps? Are there certain approaches that you recommend as far as how to get there? Because you, coming from that environment, have a lot more of the framework in your head as far as how that would transition into personal life, work life, and now all life, inside out.
Yeah.
How do you handle that in the book?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I tried to write the book to really to the operator on the shop floor, or to the person who has just never heard about lean, who's never stepped foot in a
Right,
factory one day, and just keep it
right.
very practical, very simple, because the last thing the world needed was another complicated, engineering book about lean. And I've read so many great ones, and I've read
Oh
so
my
many that
God,
have put
yeah,
me to sleep, and I
yes,
wanted something that just everyone could relate to. So in the book, I really focus on two things. I focus on making it very simple, very simple. I try to eliminate, any technical jargon or any confusing Japanese terms. Not that I don't know them or love them, but I just wanted to keep it very simple. There are plenty of books out there where people can learn all those terms. So I wanted to keep it very, very simple and practical. But I also wanted people to understand the leadership component of it, because in my experience, where most of these initiatives fail is in the leadership. And we all know that leadership has such an impact on people's lives. It could have such a
yes.
positive impact or such a negative impact. The number one element of job satisfaction is a person's direct leader that they report to. And there's been a lot of studies and a lot of research on this, and we know that people generally leave leaders; they don't leave organizations. And so,
Right.
with that in mind, I've seen personally where lean implementation transformation has worked really well, and when it has failed completely and it's been a complete waste of time, and it usually comes back to the leadership component. So those are kind of the two approaches I take. I don't get into a lot of step by steps, Rod. I get into more of, here's kind of the simplified version that I could explain, in a very practical way, and then here's kind of how you support it from a leadership perspective, whether it's you leading yourself or your family, or whether it's you leading an organization, or even if you have to coach up to the leaders in your organization because you're so passionate about transformation and seeing the improvements stick, but your leaders are not quite there yet. So I'm really trying to give folks some tools, that they could use to have those conversations and really see the waste, not only in the processes, but even in implementing and maintaining the improvements.
So it kind of on that tailing edge of what you were just talking about there. I brought up David's question here because it's an important one. What are some of the biggest mistakes leaders make during that transformation?
Yeah, so many mistakes.
Thank you for the question, David. By the way, yeah, exactly. Lots.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of mistakes. One that I've seen a lot is, that I mentioned it earlier, kind of that shiny object syndrome. Leaders hear about another company doing something, or they read about it in a book, and they want to just go, all in and implement. And a lot of times, yeah, and that changes direction, jerks people around, and a lot of times they haven't even fully implemented the last thing yet, or they haven't given it enough time to really take hold and become the standard, and they're already
Good point.
moving on to the next shiny object. And so that creates kind of this environment and this culture where people see, they see these types of things as just another initiative, another flavor of the month, and they don't ever really
Right.
fully commit to them. So to me, like, bouncing around too much, not giving things time to really soak in and resonate, that whole shiny object syndrome is one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen, because it really takes time. It does take time for improvement to take hold and to become standard and get everyone trained on it and good at it. And, it really becomes part of your, the way that you operate. So that doesn't happen overnight. That takes some time. And so you kind of have to let it marinate a bit.
Oh, good word. You're making me hungry too, by the way, with all these cakes and marinades, and my stomach's going to start growling a little bit here. But yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. Like we had talked about shifting directions, and now people are bouncing around, and that's a real thing. Maybe not as much now, but man, when sick, when all this lean manufacturing stuff really started coming in, there were people bouncing all over the place and trying to, do the new. It was more of a cool kids thing for a little bit there, and that doesn't help anyone at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
Let's see what. Thank you for that question, David. That was an excellent question.
Yeah, and just one more I'll just add to that, because
Please, yeah, please.
I couldn't forgive myself if I didn't, mention this one. But, some of the listeners may have seen the image of the ball being rolled up the hill, and that ball is to represent the improvement, and the leaders are that wedge that keeps that ball from rolling back down the hill. If you haven't seen that, Google it. I'm sure you could probably find it easily. But really what that's representing is leaders have to hold people accountable. So when we do make an improvement, we need to make sure we get the buy-in from everyone. And then to sustain that improvement, the leaders are very, very critical in ensuring that we don't backslide and we don't go back to the previous state. Because a lot of times it's going to be a worse state than where we started to begin with. So that leader role, they really need to do that. And when they don't do that, that is a huge mistake.
Excellent point. And just adding on, you also need to have it marinate enough to where it's being performed, whatever that is, being performed at a at a at an approved or at a good being performed at a good level, right? An educated level. You don't implement something and then it's operating at 100%. I mean, I guess you could, but not realistically. But then you need to get metrics out of it, right? Out of whatever's happening. And the metrics, then you can see, is it going the right? Are the metrics leading you, giving you, are they showing that you're in the right direction, right? I mean, you've got to let all that happen versus, oh, we did it for a little bit. Let's jump over here. No, let's try this. And while you're making tweaks and changes, major shifts don't give you any of that starting point to learn from, right?
100%, and that is so important. And it's funny because in my book, I could not write a book about lean without including a section about workshops and doing lean events and talking
Oh,
about how that could be applied to people's everyday lives. And in my personal experience, the most successful workshops or Kaizen events or lean events or whatever you call them, the
love
most
Kaizen.
successful always start with some sort of clear measure, some clear metric that we're measuring. So that way we understand the problem that we're trying to solve in terms of a gap that we're trying to close. And it's so funny because I've met with so many teams over the years, Rod, where I've asked them, okay, when we're thinking about the major, KPIs, safety, quality, delivery, cost, what are we going to impact in terms of this type of workshop we're going to do or this improvement that you want to implement? And people, instinctively want to say all of them. It's going to make our work
Right.
safer. It's going to make quality better. They go through the whole gambit. But then when I ask them, okay, well, what specific metric, what KPI are you tracking that I could see a gap today that on the back end of the workshop or the implementation side, I could see close? Then it's usually crickets, and people are very shy about trying to tie the
Mm,
improvement efforts to any specific measure. And that's a problem. And so what I always coach teams to
Why
do
would
is,
that be? Why would that? What, maybe I'm missing something here.
yeah.
Just call it out. What's KPI mean?
So yeah, KPI stands for key performance indicator, or some
And
people
why
might
would
say
people
key process indicator.
right? And why would people why would they go crickets on because it's accountability back to them then? Or
Sometimes
what,
it's
am I missing something there? I'm
yeah,
not sure.
I think sometimes it's an accountability thing, and sometimes people are just shy about being able to tell that story and tie the improvement back to
Ah,
something that we're
okay.
measuring. Sometimes is they don't really have the data, and they know it's going to take some work to collect the data, sometimes they know that this means we're going to be measuring the outcome, for several weeks or months beyond when they want to just wipe their hands and be done, right? So there's a lot of different reasons why, and a lot of times there's just a
Interesting.
gap in knowledge. They're just not really quite sure, what's currently being measured that would directly apply um, to the improvement they're trying to make. They have this intuition that tells them, yeah, this is going to help everyone. It's going to make the job better. It's gonna help remove waste, but if they struggle to make the connection, and that's usually where having someone who is a little bit more of an expert in lean and continuous improvement and Six Sigma could help them to, bridge the gap. And that's usually what I end up doing, is trying to help people understand, what are you currently measuring today? Because I don't want anyone to start measuring something new if they could avoid it. What are you currently measuring today that you care about, that your organization cares about, that your household, that your family cares about, that you might want to improve? So, when we're thinking about, applying this in your home, if you have a, budget of, I don't know, $1,000 a month, and you're spending 1,500, you have a $500 gap, right? And that's how I would phrase it. I would say you have a $500 gap that you're trying to close. And so I would then tell folks, well, let's understand where that $500 is going. And maybe some of it's going to subscription services, Netflix or Hulu, or what have you. Maybe some of it's going to, eating out too many times a week, or whatever it is, right? Let's understand what the gap is first. We could go back and look at our, account statements and figure out how big the gap is. Then we could start to break it down and understand where that gap is coming from before we ever just jump to a solution of, hey, I'm just going to cut out X or stop doing Y, right? Those might be the answers, but that's one step problem solving. That's not something we typically, coach people to do in lean. We really want to spend more time understanding the problem first before we start jumping to those solutions.
And that kind of it leans into McCoa, uh, her question here, and we kind of answered this a little bit earlier, but I like to call it putting colors between the layers here. How can fathers model leadership at home using lean thinking? We're kind of bringing it over a little bit more and more into the family. So
Yeah.
we kind of talked about identifying and the acronym that you were talking about. But let's lean into that a little bit more. What suggestion would you give? I'm not sure how that's pronounced. Makoa.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
I'm going to actually pull from John Maxwell a little bit here, because if you ever study John Maxwell's thoughts on leadership, he would tell you that positional leadership is the lowest form of leadership. People are only following you because you have a title. Um, and that doesn't work in lean and continuous improvement, because usually the folks leading the project don't have a title, or they're not anyone that you have to follow. So I would say, don't make that mistake at home
Yeah,
as a
good
father
point.
with your family. Don't make the mistake of thinking because you are the parent, or you are the spouse, or whatever your relational,
Oh, wow, that's powerful, dude.
position is, that automatically gives you authority and people need to follow you. You still need to lead through influence. You still need to get buy-in. You still need to listen, and
Great,
understand, your
great.
children's perspective on things. I'll tell you one little thing that I've done just throughout my, I have 3 kids. My oldest son will be 18 in a few months. I also have a 16-year-old son, and I have an 11-year-old daughter. And I know
Aw,
how I know how they react if I tell them, if I spring it on them that we got to go rake up leaves. in the fall. It's not going to be pretty. But if I give them some time to process it and I say, hey guys, some point today, we're going to all need to go outside as a family and we're going to rake up the leaves together. They might gripe a little bit, but it's not immediate. So they're able to process it a little bit before we actually go and do it. Right. And then I'm out there with them. I'm leading by example. So we're all working together on this. Because I know from experience that if I were to just say, hey, all right, everybody drop what you're doing. We're going to go outside and rake the leaves. I'm going to get about the same response as I would get in a shop or any, manufacturing team. If I came in and I said, hey, I made this improvement here, now go and do it. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be good. So you got to understand where people are at. You got to let them have a say in the process. You got to give them some time to process it, emotionally as well as mentally. And those are things that apply regardless of whether you're talking about at home as a father or whether you're talking about, a senior manager or, senior leader in an organization. Again, don't lead by position. Lead more relationally, if nothing else, and listen to folks, understand where they're at, and let them be part of the solution.
Thank you, by the way. I could tell towards the end there you were trying to add words so that I didn't leave you stranded out there. You were, as they say in TV, you were doing this. You were stretching it. Good job. Very well done. Very impressive. And thank you for your question, McCaw. I'm sorry, ma'am. Anyway, I try to do that as best as I can, but I want to hit Adam here. What role? Because I assume it plays a lot. Role does accountability play in sustainable improvement?
Yeah, so accountability is everything. So going back to
Yeah,
that model of that ball being pushed up the hill and the leader being that wedge, like without having that accountability, we'll usually find ourselves in an even worse situation than where we started. So how do we create that accountability? Well, it starts by,
and
making
who
whatever.
and
Sorry?
who? So how do we? It's also who.
Right.
Who's accountable? Is it the whole team? These are kind of break
Yeah.
all that down if
So,
you would.
so in my mind, it really comes down to the leader, whoever the leader is in the situation. If we're
Okay,
talking about a
perfect.
leader of a team, the leader has to hold themselves and everyone else accountable. So the leader has to model the behavior, and then they have to hold everyone else accountable to model that behavior as well. And so, usually, one of the easiest ways to go about starting that is by standardizing whatever the improvement is. So we make an improvement. Uh, Hopefully we had a standard when we started and this improvement is above and beyond the standard. Now we got to create a new standard. So whether we're talking about 5S again, and that standard becomes a chart that we fill out every week when we do our activities, or if in your home maybe you have a chore chart that's something similar to what a 5S chart might look like, in a shop, right? The leader, whether it's the parent at home or the first line manager in a shop, the leader has to care enough that they're actually checking to make sure that the standard is being followed, the checklists are being checked off, that the spaces are clean and organized like the checklist says they are. And when they're not, they have to be willing to go and have a conversation with the folks who are not carrying their weight. And sometimes that could be uncomfortable, and sometimes folks want to shy away from any kind of confrontation. But that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about creating that accountability. It's the leader caring enough to follow up regularly, and then have the conversations when needed to ensure that the things that we said we're going to do are actually being done.
I would think that this next question wouldn't really be that big of an item, although it probably will be, because I would imagine that as you're implementing new systems, it's hard to get burnout when you're excited and pumped up on something,
Hmm.
right? But it's a great question. Film law here, lady film law, cool. I need an attorney, ma'am. How can leaders avoid burnout while driving continuous improvements? I mean, I can see where if you're constantly driving that, but it's like also feeding you back energy at the same time, isn't it? You're getting
Yeah.
fired up about it because you're seeing this, and your
Yeah.
team is.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that there's definitely going to be that initial rush of energy and passion and motivation, especially when you start to see some results. But
Yeah,
burnout definitely could occur though, because either, maybe you're taking on too much, you're trying to do, too much too fast, or, it's just kind of hard to sustain those energy levels for some people, myself included, right, over a prolonged amount of time. So
good point.
the first thing I would say is, don't suffer in silence. Speak up. Ask for help. Be humble enough to ask for help from other leaders in your organization or from your team as needed. Don't sit there and suffer in silence. Ask for help. Share the wealth, and then also just take a look at what you're trying to accomplish and the scope and the timing, and think, is it really realistic? In most of the transformations that I've been a part of, we started very small with a model area or a lighthouse, some place where we could test out concepts in a safe way, to where if we failed, it wasn't going to, derail the entire transformation. But we created a space for us to try things out, and when we found things that worked, then we started replicating them across the rest of the factory or sites or, businesses. And usually that approach will help a lot with the burnout, because, you know, you're scoping it in a way that it's sustainable, right? And not in a way that, it's going to feel too overwhelming. So a big part of it is the scope and the boundaries that you put around what you're doing, and the other part of is who you recruit to help you along the way.
So, last question here, at least right now it is. And I kind of wanted to get into a little bit of other discussions as far as building faith into this, and bringing up in today's world, your kids, because it's a different
Yeah.
world. And I don't know, but nobody's asking any questions about those things. I don't know. I think we have a lot of manufacturing people on here. But I did get that's your email, right? No, that's you. Oh yeah, that's your
So
email, right?
so that's my website, ForgePointLLC.net. From there, you could contact me. I do, free discovery visits with folks, to learn about what kind of transformation they're wanting to get started and how I could help. There's a link to my book right there on the homepage, which is available on Amazon, in various different formats, called Everyday Lean. So it's pretty easy to find, but that's my main website that you could find all the
That's where you
information.
push everything. That's where you push most things
E-
through.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, and on there, I assume there's also information as far as the different topics that we've been talking about today.
Yeah,
Um, but I wanted this one. Hold on, let me. Lean principle. Every executive should practice daily. There was a different question I wanted to ask you about, in the implementation, and and oh, I know what it was. And most people that you talk to, let me ask you this: when they're talking to you, they've come across your book, they've seen this show, they've seen you on other talks and so forth, and they're like, okay, so what you're being contacted primarily by people for help, or through your book, um, that are probably not familiar with Sigma Six and lean manufacturing, and not necessarily that from. Who are the people that are coming to you mostly? That you see, or do you have any metrics on that? Is it people wanting to improve their family lives and then pushing it through to work, or is it the other way around? They're wanting to get this improvements, whether it be their department, their company, whatever it is, and then that is just a natural to be the whole person and not half a person, to be authentic now. Who do you see coming mainly first? Am I asking
yeah,
that
yeah.
right?
I think I understand what you're saying there, Rod. So I would say the folks that I've worked with most frequently are organizational leaders, so senior leaders and executive leaders in various different organizations, who are really just trying to understand how to be better leaders and empower transformation in their organization. And then second to that would be like pastors and leaders in various different church organizations, because this applies so much to, people's spiritual lives. And, I've talked to pastors that have told me, hey, I'm trying to go beyond just managing my congregation and actually leading my congregation. So, I do like,
Yeah,
I do John Maxwell based mastermind courses with pastors geared just for pastors. So pastors could come together and learn from each other. I'm just the facilitator, right? I'm just making sure that, we're actually learning the leadership principles, but a lot of the learning is happening from other pastors just talking to each other in the right context and learning how to delegate certain things and when to step into more of the leader role versus the manager role, because you could see that if depending on the size of your organization, a church congregation could very much start to fall into the same traps of an aerospace manufacturer, right? In terms
sure.
of not empowering its people, not listening to the people, just various different things, not supporting their people in the right way. And so it's a problem that I'm passionate about because I am a Christian and I take my faith very seriously, and I want to make sure that the things that I've learned, mostly working with manufacturing companies, that I'm taking those nuggets and I'm helping people to grow in their faith and to build up the people in their congregations. And if I've been given one superpower, it's this: is I have the ability to oversimplify very complicated terms. And so
Yeah, I
I
saw
take
that.
I take very complicated concepts, and look, I'm an educated man. I have a master's degree from Indiana University. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that because it was hard for me, and I managed to survive, and I was probably the dumbest person in every class, but I managed to get through and graduate. So I have this superpower that I take these overcomplicated subjects and I could simplify them so that folks can see, how they could be applied to whatever it is they're doing. So it's very easy for, let's just say a pastor to say, hey, those things worked in, manufacturing, but how would they apply here? I've been able to help bridge that gap and help them see how, some of those same principles do apply. And again, not just to, church congregations, but just to people's home life as well.
Yeah, home life and in today's world, this is interesting too because the world is shifting so much. Well, manufacturing shifting with AI and everything's shifting with AI and automation and all that, right? The world is the Jetsons are here, right? They're not coming. They're already here.
Right.
And so there's that aspect. And then kids are different. And then um, in today's world as it's shifting, the past couple of decades have also been shifting in as far as parental roles at home and relationships between fathers and sons or fathers and daughters. Congratulations. I raised five boys. My girls now come as granddaughters. They're all having granddaughters.
Ah,
I
that's
think there's
awesome.
one son out of it, but yeah, I grew up in testosterone, full of testosterone. I got to be a pretty good carpenter because there were always asses going off of a couch through a wall or something. Yeah, yeah, right. Your
Yeah,
boy is probably no different.
yeah,
And yet, while I say that, the roles of being a male has shifted quite a bit. Is bit. Remember that we were talking about you can't just change something because it knocks people around. Well,
right.
there's a shift that's happened in society about a lot of things, and a lot of it's been centered around what it's like to be a male, um,
Yeah,
and to the point where I mean, literally, it's funny because political populations have started to shift because it's been so tumultuous to be a male over the
yeah,
last 20 years that they had nowhere to go. So what they're finding, let's say, the Republican Party versus a different party, but only because there's
right.
this going on. So
Yeah.
how does that work within in how did you pull that together as well? Pull that into there, and then we'll hit adventure show here if you would.
Well, it's funny because by working with the various different pastors and church organizations throughout the years,
I
it's come
figured
up.
that was a tie.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
come up over and over again, and kind of the consensus that I've kind of gathered is that a lot of the men in different church organizations feel I would say, underserved or maybe left out to a certain degree. But conversely, a lot of the
100%.
church leaders feel like a lot of the men are disengaged and are not as interested in participating. And it kind of goes both ways, and they're kind of
What do you
feeding each
mean in
other.
participating in what?
Yeah, just in I would say church life in general. So
Okay.
an example, I've talked to pastors of churches with 2, 3,000 people who will start a men's group, and they're lucky to have 5 men show up.
Oh yeah.
And just by the sheer numbers, you would think that they would have to have multiple groups, right? Because there's so
Right.
many people. But it's been pretty consistent where, for whatever reason, and again, I think it's kind of a two-way street here. The men feel sort of left out or underserved, or it feels like more of a feminine environment. So the men kind of shy away. And then likewise, the men, are kind of contributing to that because they don't want to show up and participate and make it a more masculine environment and really take on the role that I believe that, the Christian faith calls us to take, which is, to be the spiritual, leaders in not just our home, but in our communities as well. And so, a few years ago, I really started to get passionate about this because again, I'm looking at everything through the lens of continuous improvement and how do we just make it better, right? How,
Yeah.
how do we just improve this process, and what is the root cause of the problems that we're seeing? And I kind of came across it firsthand when my older son turned 15, because when he turned 15, I don't remember what I was reading at the time, but I was reading something, and it gave me this idea that around 15, maybe somewhere between 13 and 15 would probably be, the age that most cultures throughout, history have done some sort of rite of passage ceremony. Whether it's a bar mitzvah or, whatever it is, different cultures have done different things. And so when my older son turned 15, I went to the pastor at my church and I asked him, I said, you have a, son that's a little bit older than mine. Have you done any sort of rite of passage? What do you recommend? And I talked to him and I talked to 3 or 4 other leaders in my church and basically got the same answer from all of them, was that they had done very little, if anything at all. And it just kind of, highlighted this gap that I was seeing. And part of the problem that I'm seeing where, men are kind of felt left out. And it starts when, a teenage boy is turning into a man, and it kind of just continues on, because we don't really do anything. And so, I, started kind of benchmarking, to use a lean term, right? I started benchmarking what other people were doing and reading books about rite of passages. And I actually came across a great book called Milestones to Manhood. I forget the author, but that was the name of the book. And it gave me some ideas for putting together a rite of passage weekend for my son. And I won't go into a lot of details, but I will say that it involved myself and some other men in my son's life, uncles and other men from our home group. And it involved us just getting away just as men for a weekend, doing some fishing and some hiking, and a lot of time in prayer and Bible study, and just sharing, from our perspective, what it meant to be a man. And it concluded with, a ceremony that we held where we essentially, read letters and gave gifts and basically said, hey, from this point on, these men now see you as a man. So you don't need to go out into the world and try to prove your manhood or seek validation from anyone else, because these other men recognize you as one of them. And we're here to support you, from this day forward to the rest, for the rest of your life. And I think that was something that God really put on my heart to do, Rod, because I just seen it as a big gap. And, I did it for both my boys as they turned 15. And really, I feel like, that's something that I would love to see become more widespread, and, more fathers and uncles do, with their boys, to just show them that, hey, this is what manhood is about. This is what it means to be a man. And, you don't need to join a gang or commit a crime or, get a girl pregnant to call yourself a man. No, you are a man because you are created to be a man. And here's what it means.
We need more people like you and more messages like that in today's world, because I can imagine. I mean, like you said, the churches aren't as involved because the men feel like they're left out, and the men aren't getting involved because the churches, that vice versa. That always that. And I would layer on top of that because to promote being a male these days, although it's starting to get a little better, but for the last decade, let's say, it's been getting progressively and progressively worse. And you know how our society is, with pendulum swings way the,
Right.
pardon my language, F over here, and then it swings way the F over here, where we all live right in here, basically. 80-90% of us live in here. But
Yes.
we need that message much, much, much more in today's world, and to be able to kind of develop out some sort of a I'm sorry, I'm going blank on the word. What is it coming out? What did you just call it?
Rite of passage.
Rite of passage.
Yeah.
To have a rite of passages. Those things. You think of a village, right? You think of back in the days when hunters. There's a rite of passage for a male. Some are pretty crazy extreme, but
Right.
they're because then you're doing that traditional world, and there is that passage that now it lifts you. It makes you that next step. So let's
Yeah.
use that as a board here. What's one lean principle? Now she's saying every executive should practice daily, but we've already gone all the way through this, and this is a great question. It's another show. I love it when shows come on here, the adventure show. Um, but I would extend that, bouncing off of what we just talked about,
Yeah.
and in daily life, literally daily life. What is one practice
Yeah.
that somebody that is heading your journey, heading your direction, and along your journey, which I think is the way that the world will swing back to.
Yeah. So
Um,
I would say the biggest thing is consistency. And so if we're talking about an
there you go.
executive, if we're talking about an executive in a company, you probably, if you're an executive, probably expect your team members to follow standard work. So I would ask executives, do you have leader standard work that you follow? Be consistent. If you are a father, you probably have rules for your children. Do you follow those rules? Be consistent. I grew up in an era where it was very much, children are to be seen and not heard, and do what I do, not what I say. That doesn't necessarily work today. We know
No, not at
we
all.
we know that people learn more from what they see you model than what they hear you say, and we know that people remember a lot more how you make them feel versus what you might say to them. So I would say that consistency is key. If you're an executive, have your own leader standard work, follow it, model the behaviors you want your people to see. If you're a father, if you're a parent, same thing at home, model the behaviors that you want to see. If you teach your children the 10 commandments, make sure that they're seeing you follow them. And when you don't follow them, it's okay. Just you have to admit it. You have to be humble enough to admit it and to, confess and ask, for forgiveness. And I do that all the time. I'm far from perfect. I tell my kids to do stuff all the time that I know they see
What?
me doing the opposite. And I just have to admit it. Hey guys, like I failed. I failed to hold the standard that I keep for myself and for you. And I just need you guys to forgive me, and let's just try to do better. So consistency, I'd say, is number one.
That's beautiful, beautiful, man. Yeah, I write a column for the newspaper here, a weekly column. I started doing that I just turned in my fourth column, so a month now I've been doing it. It goes along with the show that I do, the Substack I mentioned to you earlier, newsletter. I've been a writer all my life. I love writing. But the reason I bring that up is because I just did to the Mangum Star. I just turned in next week's episode, and it's called "An Old Man in His Shoes," and it's basically it's a poem based on a poem that's about the roads that we lead. The roads that what do these old shoes look like, right? Because it's the life that has been led, right? The path taken, and it was based upon a couple of kids I noticed in the park were watching this old man, And then so the column wrote, goes back and it says kids are watching more than you think they are. They watch how you handle something, what affects you. Are you in the conversation? Are you involving them in the conversation? And that's what they're learning. That's the takeaway. And that was what that was about. And you just said that exact thing. And it was such a moment there for me. This has been an awesome freaking
Well, Rod,
show, dude.
I hate to tell everybody this, but I read it and I was just paraphrasing what I read. I was totally stealing your ideas there, man. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Pass the paper around the neighborhood then.
One thing I will say about that though, and modeling that behavior, and it's one of the things that I read some years ago, that really kind of sparked a lot of thoughts in my mind, and it was about elephants. And I don't know if you've ever heard this story, but apparently, some years ago there was a problem with elephants in South Africa where so many of the bulls had been hunted for their ivory that all the young males started running wild and they started killing rhinos and other animals just, for no reason. They started attacking villages. And it was because they didn't have that example to model. They didn't have the bulls in their life. And that continued until the government in South Africa they like imported some male bulls, and then those bulls came in
I
like brought
remember that.
stability. You remember that?
I remember that time when the young bulls were just destroying everything, tearing up towns and killing people and killing. Go ahead. I remember that.
Yeah, and so I remember reading about this, years after the fact, and it wasn't until they brought in some new older male elephants that things started to settle down and things went back to normal. And it's like, that when I was reading that, I just thought, how much does that apply to us as men? And whether you're physically there or not, maybe you're physically there, but mentally you're checked out, and you're not providing that example, or you're not there for your children to observe. It applies to humans as well. And so, that was a powerful story that really just kind of, foot stomps the importance of, modeling the right behavior and just being there, and the importance of manhood.
Oh, dude, awesome show. Awesome show. I got your site back up there. And is there any, as you wave goodbye to your well over 700 people still here, almost an hour and a half now, still 700 people in listening to your message, and please contact him, and please, let's build on this. I wish we would have spent selfishly. I wish we would have spent more time, and maybe we can do a follow-up more towards from family to business, and instead of where we're drawing kind of more business to family, because I'd really love to talk about, leadership in selfishly as males. I've got a lot of males in my blood, and and our country needs a unified great middle class. So any final thoughts as you wave, and I'll send you back to the green room and I'll shut her down.
Yeah, Rod, it was just a pleasure just to be with you today, and great conversation. And I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation. If folks want to reach out to me,
wait. Sorry,
Yeah.
I screwed up your role there. But you're a religious man. You ever watch? Do you know of the show called The 700 Club on TV?
Yes, I've seen it. I've seen it before.
You've got the frickin'. I just realized this right now. It's been 700 the whole time. You are the new 700 Club. Go on with what you were saying. I couldn't resist that. It just popped into my head.
Hey, this is good. We're bringing back the 700s Club now in a whole different format. That's awesome.
A lot younger now.
Yeah. So I was just saying.
Some of us are.
Yeah, so let's keep the conversation going. The next book that God has put on my heart to write is going to be specifically about Christian manhood and applying, the leadership principles that I've learned throughout my life, studying the great, leadership teachers, and how, they mesh with what the Bible says about, what a man should be. That one is in work right now. So follow me, and when it comes out, you guys could be the first to, see what that's all about. But that's one of the next books I got us put on my heart to write that is in early development right now. But let's keep the conversation going and let me help you get the transformation started. Reach out to me on my website and just let me know how I could help. I'm ready to help you get going with, whatever it is you're focusing on. So it's been a pleasure.
You got it, brother. Give us a big wave and I'll throw you in the green room.
All right. Bye, everyone. God bless.
God bless. All right. As advertised, that was a very powerful message, very well accepted. I don't think anybody's moved from their seat at all. Coffee still warm? You got some good kombucha? You got it going good? Hey, appreciate everybody being here. I want to thank the Mangum City Library again for their sponsorship and their help in our daily activities, along with Leaf Lab in what they do with us in our growing partnership together. I'll be showing some videos from the different organizations off and on throughout the weeks. By the way, remember this is Christmas week. By the way, Randall, Merry Christmas, by the way.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you and all your listeners.
Thank you. All right, yeah, duh. I kind of wrapped up and look at it, there's still 700 people here. They're not sick of me yet. So Merry Christmas, everybody. But we are going to have an abridged. I'm going to be working in the background, but we're only doing one more show, and tomorrow's show is going to be a really, really, really interesting show. It's similar to this in that it's working on the inside out, but in this case, it's diagnosing why you're making the wrong decisions and why that kind of stuff keeps repeating itself. And it gets back to personality. I'm fascinated by that, the combination of these shows, because they're all about God and about our inner being, and what a perfect last couple of weeks that have led up to Christmas here. But it is going to be an abridged season this week. Actually, until we get through New Year, it's going to be, I think we've got 3 or 4 shows next week and a couple the week after that. And then we kind of get back into February and a little bit fuller shows. I think we'll be doing the 5, 6, 7 a week. All right, that's it, folks. As always, look to the end of the outro video. Wait for that. And I do a little something at the very end there. Just thank you for staying around through the whole show, because this is Insights and Straight Talk. There's still over 700 people here. What are you folks doing? What is going on, man? I love you guys. Please subscribe and like the episode. Keep us going. We're about 20,000. 22,000, I think, now on our social media for subscribers. So please subscribe to Insights and Straight Talk, as well as our Substack. It's free. Great information. We had Barbieisms come out today, meaning on Monday. Every Monday we do a Barbieism, and you'll see why here in a little bit. Tomorrow or Wednesday, we'll be doing a pages and poems. That's either an excerpt out of my book or a poem. The last one I just referred to was about an old man and his shoes. I'm Rodd Duff. I'm your host, and I'm out of here.
Before you leave, if you'd like to watch another one of the podcasts, click the first link in the description. We love having you here, and we appreciate all your support.
And with that, producer Barbie and I are out.